right, so first of all, you are going to find your gray sheet of paper that I gave you in your art kit. So if you don't have a gray sheet of paper, a white sheet will work, but again, with toned paper, the gray of the paper is going to be doing some of the work for you, so it's actually to your benefit to have a gray sheet of paper. So I'm working vertically because my skull is oriented more vertical, so more tall than it is long. If you are doing a skull of an animal and would fit better horizontally, then by all means flip your paper and work horizontal. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm making a couple of tick marks. So tick marks are these little kind of dashes, and I'm just trying to get the heights. So I think you guys should go pretty big on this. I'd say about 8 inches, and you'll see me with my ruler on this. 8 inches in one direction at least. I think 8 for the top part and like 6.5 or something for the side is the measurements that I'm using. I did choose a skull that is partially turned away from the viewer because I think that's a more interesting pose. When you have a model that's posed with their head turned like that, it's called the 3/4 pose, and we'll be learning more about that later. So I'm actually doing some measurements. I'm checking the height to the width, and I'm using my paintbrush handle to do this. So I measure oftentimes with a paintbrush or with a pencil in order to get the height versus width. So I come up with a measurement for the height, and then I compare what I know, which is the height, to the width. I know that sounds a little bit confusing. That blew my mind the first time I heard that. But it does make sense. So I'll be repeating that, and I'll show you guys how to measure. And hopefully you'll start to use it too. And again, these are techniques that are advanced. They're usually taught at college level, and you're learning them now. So I'm trying to get the gesture of the skull here, which is mainly the outside bits of the skull, maybe a little bit of interior stuff. Okay, one of the things that I've done here is I've drawn a line that marks the halfway point on the skull, so halfway in the head. And then I've also drawn a line that kind of bisects the face in half. So it cuts the face in half effectively down the center line. So the center line would be, you want to actually imagine like a line right down the center of your face, down the middle of the bridge of your nose, down to the middle of your lips, and to your chin. But if your head turns, so does that line. So in my case, because I'm doing a 3/4 view, or the 3/4 pose, I'm going to see much more of the skull on that left-hand side and much less on the right. So that's where the line is and why it's there. And this is going to help me. You can also draw that line directly onto your picture, which I'm going to show you in a minute, because those are lines that are important in terms of proportion and where things go. It's easy to get lost if you don't have a basic grid pattern on the face, and that's what I mean by a grid pattern, a vertical axis and a horizontal. And this is true also when you go to drawing the face, a fully fleshed out face. Okay, so I wanted to show you what I'm actually doing with that picture. So I'm looking at the picture and trying to find that line that divides the face in half vertically and the line that divides the face in half horizontally. So I'm actually just measuring it to get the halfway in the head line. And I'm using a colored Sharpie there, and I'm drawing right on top of my photograph. So that's where it is. Usually the eye line is right in the middle of the head, but in this case, it looks like the head, it's like the camera was taking the photo from a little bit below the eye level, so the eyes are a little bit higher than they normally would be. And I'm trying to find that center of the nose, and I'm going to be drawing a vertical axis. Here is that vertical axis. I'm using a different pen here. It's green, but it looks kind of like black. Those two lines will help inform me of where to place things. Like, for instance, the nose, there's kind of like a bullseye. There's an intersection right where the nose is. And here I'm trying to figure out, where do those teeth hit if I draw a straight line up? Where do they hit in relationship to the eye socket, in relationship to the jaw? So that's actually called a plumb line, when you drop a line straight down or straight up. And that's what I'm doing there. So plumb lines really help. I use those all the time. If the lines are going to bug you while you're working, print a second copy. So I went ahead and worked off camera to get the eyes and the nose, but I am paying really close attention to those lines, that horizontal red line that you can actually see there on the photograph. And I'm like asking myself, where does the eye socket hit on that line? If it even does, how far away from that line is it? And then I'm also checking the angles of things. With the skull, you're going to have some fantastic negative space or negative shapes. So remember, negative shapes means empty or open shapes, or there are spaces that are not occupied. So in this case, I'm looking at the eye sockets as empty negative space. The nose as well. There's a little pocket of darkness right behind the teeth there near the jaw. There's just some areas there that create some nice little open negative space. Same on the cheekbone there. And I look at that and I see it as a shape. Okay, so this skull happens to have a little bit of the neck included. And I say neck, but I really mean spinal column there. And I thought I gave it like a little bit more of an eerie factor having the neck on there too, like it's alive. Similar to that Van Gogh painting that we were looking at of the skull smoking a cigarette. It just kind of looks like it's alive. Not sure if I mentioned this, but I am using Vine charcoal here. I know it looks like I'm pressing hard, but it's Vine charcoal. And the thing about Vine charcoal is it wipes off very light. So if you are working in pencil and you're not working in Vine charcoal, then I'm going to ask that you do those things that I've told you about before, which is to go light, go thin, and have broken lines. Now I am using some broken lines, or at least I was initially. And you're actually going to see me take a paper towel and a blending stump and fade this outline so I don't have such a heavy outline. Oh, there we go. Because remember, heavy outlines is going to equal a flat form. And the goal here is really to portray something that has the illusion of volume or mass. So by lightening those lines and getting them to be barely there, it will help to create mass or volume. So most of you I know don't have Vine charcoal. I'm using charcoal for a number of reasons. One, because I love charcoal. Two, because it really shows up well in videos. If I tried to do this with pencil, it wouldn't show up as clearly. So I like that it's highly visible. And you can achieve all these effects in a similar way with pencil. So that's why I'm doing it this way. But for you, if you're using pencil, please remember to go very light. And oops, there we go. So you can see I'm getting in the teeth here. Teeth are hard to do. They're one of the things that a lot of students get caught up on. And they're a little bit confusing. You do have to understand that the front two teeth are pretty wide and flat, and that the successive teeth get a little bit smaller, except for when you reach the molars, which tend to be wide and kind of thick. I did count all the teeth and tried to line them up as best I could with the top row of teeth. So I was comparing the top row to the bottom, and they kind of look like little gumdrops or headstones. At least the small ones do. The thing about the teeth is you don't want to press too hard. Now again, I'm using charcoal here so I can just wipe this stuff off because it's the Vine charcoal and not the compressed. But for you, if you're using pencil, please do this part really light. If we were actually drawing a person and we're trying to make them look like a living, fleshed out person, you would have to go really light because it's really easy to make it look like there's food in the teeth, or like the teeth are kind of rotting if you press too hard. And you may have animal teeth. It's also important to get those correct too. Just like with the scientific drawing that you were doing, it's important to try and be accurate. That's the thing about what we do, is that you can work really hard at trying to portray something, and then another person can walk up who is not an artist, who does not have training, and they can recognize some of the mistakes that you've made. This initial outline does need to be accurate. So that's why I'm going to have you do what you've done on the past several projects and assignments. I want you to turn it in on a Google slide, and please accompany that picture with your reference picture too. So your drawing and then the reference picture. That way I can really take a look, compare the two, and give you some feedback on it. This is hard. This is not an easy assignment. This is probably the hardest thing we've done so far. So when you have the outline, I want you to submit it for feedback before we do any shading. And I will try and get to those in a timely manner. That way you have it and you know what to correct before we move on. And we might be able to do a little bit of what's called toning today. Okay. So just keep in mind that this is just kind of phase 2 of the drawing. By the time we're done toning, that does not mean that we are done with shading the drawing in. It's just one step closer towards our finished piece. So anyway, to tone, we're not going to think so much about cross-hatching and hatching right now, but you saw me going one way with my stroke. That's pretty normal when you tone. When we talk about toning in art, what that really means is giving kind of a base coat, and then we're going to layer on top of it. So in this case, we're going with a base coat of maybe 2 or 3 shades of gray. And I'm doing it with the Vine charcoal. You will be doing it with a pencil unless you have charcoal of your own. So the great thing about Vine charcoal is it wipes off pretty easily and cleans up. I'm also going to be using compressed charcoal, which is the stuff that's found in the charcoal pencils. So you'll see me work with that later. So I'm just filling in those shapes of the nose and the eye sockets. By the way, this is a great time to make adjustments if you need to reevaluate the shape of the left eye socket, for instance, or you realize that the nose needs to go longer in some place. So it's not a bad thing to look for areas that need a little tweaking. Like I forgot to put in that line back there. Oops. Stuff you start to notice the more you look at your drawing, the more you work on it. So, like I've told you before, I really enjoy working from dark to light, and I'm going to encourage you to do that on this too. So when you tone, I want you to look for the darker areas first. So go there as priority areas. So I'm looking for any spot that is in some kind of shadow. So anything that sinks in, any kind of hole or opening, I'm going to shade that. And I would try and get your shading to be neat. With the Vine charcoal, I'm getting away with more of a hatch, but I'm going to go in and blend it with a blending stump. For you, I'd say keep your stroke pretty tight if you're using regular pencil. And this is not perfect, but you can kind of see where the light and shadow areas are coming together. So if you have feedback, you can do a little bit of this toning. Don't do too much, but you can do a little bit of toning in preparation for next class.